Hi, a little reminder that we are live on Twitch every Friday and Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Greek hour. So don't hesitate to join us for cozy streams. Thank you, and I let you with the video.
The Black Archives, Case 01, The Voices Underwater. Molly was 7 years old the first time she heard them. She lived into an old farmhouse near a large lake, notorious for the tragedies that had occurred there. Many children had drowned, and many bodies were never fully recovered, only fragments scattered about. The deaths had been so numerous that the prefecture had forbidden anyone from swimming in the lake or even walking along its shores. Barriers had been erected to block all access. Her house was just a few meters from the lake, so Molly could see it every time she played into the garden, despite the barriers and the fence. A feeling deep inside her compelled her to go closer. Often, her eyes would remain fixed on the lake for several minutes, which sometimes worried her parents. When they noticed her, they would grab her arm and force her back inside, repeatedly telling her not to go past the fence. Every parent in town must have shared the same fear. Some nights, she thought she heard whispers, children's voices laughing. Sometimes she heard them calling her, asking her to go outside and play. Of course, she never did. She was too afraid of being scolded by her parents. They had told her about the danger this place posed for children, but she didn't understand how a lake could be so dangerous, especially for someone like her who was a very good swimmer. She only understood a few years later when she finally let her curiosity get the better of her. One evening, she was playing in the garden on her swing, trying to go as high as she could. Her eyes were fixed on the lake's water. There was something special about the water, she could feel it. There was something hidden in there. Her curiosity only grew, especially that day when her parents were too busy to supervise her. As she swung on the swing, a shape suddenly appeared in the water. It was fleeting, but she was sure she had seen movement. She glanced around to make sure her parents hadn't seen her. They were still focused on their computers working. So she got off the swing and quietly made her way toward the lake. After a bit of searching, she found a hole in the wire mesh fence, large enough for a small person to pass through. With a little effort, she squeezed through the mesh and finally reached the other side, the side she'd always been forbidden to go to. She cautiously approached the water edge to examine its surface, convinced that something was there. That's when a shadow caught her eye. In the center of the lake, a dark moving mass. She moved a little closer to the edge to get a better look, but it was too dark to really make out what it was. Perhaps they were fish. If so, she wanted to see them up close. Her curiosity was growing stronger and stronger. The dark mass was only making slight movements, but it was in the middle of the lake. Discouraged, she went home determined to return and find a way to coax whatever was in the lake out of her. She went back to her room as if nothing had happened. Her parents hadn't even noticed she'd disappear for several minutes, so engrossed were they in their work. They were glued to their computers or phone, talking on the phone with their colleagues, pacing back and forth because of the stress it caused them. She sunk into bed, but she barely slept that night. Only one thought kept nagging at her. How could she get a closer look at the thing in the lake? Bearing in mind all the tragic stories that had befallen the local children, there was no way she was going to plunge into the water because of her morbid curiosity. Her thoughts revolved solely around it, the lake, what lay within it, and why the water seemed so mysterious. Why did this place possess such a menacing yet intriguing aura? When she finally managed to fall asleep, it was in her dreams that the lake returned to haunt her. Children's voices called to her, begging her to come play with them because they were bored and hoped she would become their friend. Children made of shadows, eternally trapped in the depth, their hands trying in vain to reach out of the water. She awoke the next day with an overwhelming urge to return into the pool, convinced that her dreams were a clear sign that it was the best thing to do. Unfortunately, she had school that day, so she had to wait until the evening to put her plan in action. On the other hand, she had the whole day to find a strategy that would lure the thing closer to the lake. The day passed without her mind wandering from her objective. She could almost hear the voices calling her in her head. At the time, she thought she was just having auditory hallucinations. It was only much too late that she realized how real those voices were. When she finally got home from school, she discovered a chocolate cake her mother had baked for her afternoon snack. A perfect idea then sprouted into her mind. All living things loved chocolate cake, so it would be excellent bait to attract the thing to the lake. Simple logic, typical of children of her age. So she took a slice and wrapped it in a tea towel under her mother's intrigued gaze. Oh, come on. She took a slice and wrapped it in a towel. I'm gonna do it. She took a slice and wrapped it in a tea towel under her mother's intrigued gaze. Yes. I'm going to do my homework and I don't want to get cake crumbs everywhere, she said, praying she would be believed. Don't forget to put the dishcloth back in its place afterward, her mother replied without the slightest hint of suspicion, prompting a small sigh of relief from Molly. She nodded and hurried to her room. The excuse of homework would only give her an hour before her parent came back to check on her. She had to act quickly so they wouldn't notice she was missing. Stuffing the folded dishcloth into her pocket, she slipped it out of her bedroom window. The window was on the first floor, which was dangerous for a 7-year-old, but she knew how to climb the wall safely. She'd done it several times before. So she carefully scaled the wall, using the stones protruding from the facade and as handholds. During her descent, a gust of wind shook her hair, bringing with it whispers that echoed in her ears, repeating her name. She froze to listen, her eyes automatically turning toward the lake. She was certain the voices were coming from there. She jumped the few meters that still separated her from the ground, the sound of her landing thankfully muffled by the grass. The little girl darted toward the lake, passing through the hole in the fence before stopping at the water's edge, eagerly searching for the slightest sign of movement. After a few seconds, the still water began to ripple, and a figure emerged from the depths, rising slightly to the surface. Her heart pounding, she took the dish towel from her pocket and unfolded it to reveal the piece of cake, which she held up with a trembling hand. "Hello, I know you're here. I thought you might be hungry, so I brewed you some cake," she announced, only to be met with an oppressive silence. She placed the food at the water's edge and quickly stepped back, hoping to attract the creature enough to get a close look. She waited and waited, watching the minutes tick by as her legs twitched with impatience, knowing she only had an hour before her absence would be noticed. At her wits' end, she sighed and started to leave, her shoulders slumping in disappointment. Just then, she heard a splashing sound. She wheeled around, breathless with apprehension. There it was. The figure had moved closer to the water's edge, eyeing the cake. Molly had managed to lure it. To avoid frightening the creature, she approached slowly, without any sudden movement, trying to get a closer look, her body trembling with excitement. Her eyes fell upon the thing that lived in the lake. She could finally see it clearly, discern what it was, a shadow, the silhouette of a child whose pupil-less, iris-less white eyes remained fixed upon her. "Hello," she stammered, unable to tear her gaze away from the creature. The shadow didn't respond and remained motionless, the tension in the air rising with the shiver its white eyes sent down the girl's spine. "Can you talk?" she asked, taking a step forward. "Yes, I can," the figure confirmed. Its voice wasn't human. It sounded like a distant echo, an ethereal sound that resonated in her soul, like a siren's song. A voice so beautiful and enchanting that she longed to hear it again. "I brought you cake. You can have it," she encouraged. "I can't get out of the water, but if you could put it in, then I can eat it," he confided. After a long hesitation, Molly took the piece of cake and knelt at the water's edge to lower the dessert into the water so he could take it, her heart pounding. She watched him swim toward her, reaching out his arm. But as the creature's fingers brushed against the pastry, its hand wrapped around the little girl's wrist and held her tightly. Her round eyes met the shadows as the cake sank into the depth, ignored by the shadow which focused only on Molly. "What are you doing?" she stammered, her voice trembling, paralyzed by shock. The shadow's grip tightened, taking her breath away. We're so alone here. Come with us and let's be friends," he sang, gently pulling her toward him. Despite her instinct screaming at her to run away, the voice urged her to stay and listen, so she didn't move an inch. "You?" she repeated, frowning. He nodded slowly, a swarm of hands appearing around him. "We've been locked up here for so long," he complained. A cry of surprise escaped the young girl, and she tried to pull her arm away from his grasp, but he only tightened his grip, pulling her forward. "Who are you?" "Our souls have been trapped here ever since we drowned," he replied vaguely. Despite the limited information, she quickly understood that they were the children who had disappeared into the lake. But the children were dead, so were the ghosts. As a little girl, she really believed in stories of monsters and ghosts. So she didn't doubt their existence. Unfortunately, she was too young to know what to do in this situation, especially since the ghost gripping her wrist didn't seem too willing to let her go. She pulled with all her might to escape, but soon the hands of the other ghosts were clinging to her ankles, their voices blending into a mournful chant. The hand dragged her into the water, and no matter how hard she struggled, it was no use. She was trapped. Before her head sank beneath the surface, she managed to scream at the top of her lungs, "Mommy." Then the water engulfed her. She tried to swim, to fight, to reach the surface, but the ghostly hands kept pulling her deeper into the dark depth. The ghost she had spoken to smiled at her, his pupilless eyes shining with joy. "We have a new friend now," he announced to his invisible companions. Applause and laughter rippled around Molly. She could feel their presence even though she couldn't see them. The other ghosts were everywhere, eagerly waiting for her to join them. The bottom of the lake was dark and cold, filled with white eyes and smiles that seemed more predatory than jovial. She continued to struggle and panic until all the ghosts began to sing in unison. Her body relaxed on its own, and her mind became clouded. Unable to think, unable to consider anything. She was about to inhale deeply, drawing the water into her lungs, when a mass fell into the lake right beside her. Strong arms grabbed her and lifted her out of the water, placing her on the shore. She gasped for air, coughing up the small amount of liquid that had seeped into her mouth before her release. "What possessed you to dive in here?" her father shouted, his voice trembling, almost breaking. All she could do was look at him with guilt, sitting in the grass, trying to grasp what had just happened to her. He was soaked from head to toe, his eyes desperately searching for hers, hoping to find some explanation. She remained silent and turned her head toward the lake, which had returned to normal. Not a single ghost, not a single silhouette, not even a movement. It was as if the lake had never inhabited any creature. Yet, at only 7 years old, she thought her father would believe her if she told him about her ordeal. So she told him everything in minute detail. At that moment, the man's face fell, not from fear of ghosts, but rather from disappointment or worry at seeing his daughter spouting stories about ghosts with Siren's voice. The fact that he didn't believe her became clear very quickly when he grabbed her arm and dragged her into the house to explain to the mother that she urgently needed a therapist. When he told her Molly's story, her mother's eyes filled with worry and guilt. She must have felt responsible, given that it was her who had constantly told her about the children drowned in the lake, warning her not to go near it. She certainly thought she was the source of these fantastical delusions. Molly was sent to her room, and her parents spent the night discussing her mental state. Was it stress that had made her imagine all these things, or perhaps it was the excess of stories her mother had told her about the lake? She didn't dare say a word, not for fear of her parent would think she was crazy, but because the children's voices kept singing. Strangely, she was the only one who could hear them. They filled her mind, preventing her other thoughts from being clear. The singing wasn't loud, frightening, or even unpleasant, quite the opposite. The melody drew her in, made her want to return to the lake to find the ghosts, but she resisted because she knew very well how lucky she had been to escape that time. She paced into her room, tormented by the incessant whispers that gave her no peace, constantly present in her ear day and night. At her parents' request, she started seeing a therapist who tried to convince her she'd imagined it all, but it was hard to believe him when she kept hearing the ghostly chants. Chants? Of course, she didn't tell him or her parents anything because she didn't want to make things worse or worry them more than they already were. However, the voices were becoming difficult to cope with on her own. Hearing them constantly in the background every moment was starting to drive her crazy. Nighttime was the worst time. She already had to fight their pull during the day, so she kept her mind occupied to drown out their chanting. But at night alone, surrounded by silence and darkness, it became truly difficult not to succumb. She rocked and tossed to distract herself. It was impossible to sleep peacefully. She talked to herself, trying to convince herself to not listen to what the voices were saying. Come back, come with us, we miss you, please, we're so alone. And she fought to ignore their pleas and calls. Sometimes she cried. She was so mentally exhausted, unable to get a proper night's sleep or even a moment of peace and quiet. She was becoming increasingly at her wits' end, and therefore more and more vulnerable to the sirens who were never tired. Some nights, her parents had to lock her in her room because she was having sleepwalking episodes influenced by the voices. She would get up in her sleep and walk to the door, unconsciously returning to the lake. This became so frequent that a padlock had been put on her bedroom door. Hi, I made it. Hello, hi. Welcome. Okay, where was I? Yeah, this became so frequent that a padlock had been put on her bedroom door, in addition to the locked lock. During these sleepwalking episodes, she could spend hours scratching at the wooden door with her fingernails, so that the next morning, when she woke up, she would find her fingers bleeding and scratch mark on the door. When she finally managed to sleep, the ghost followed her in her dream. She saw and heard them everywhere. She drew them. She became obsessed with that lake. And then one day, silence. Everything stopped suddenly. She could hardly believe she was finally free. The voices had stopped singing. They no longer called her. They had finally left her alone. That day, she stayed in her room for an entire day, listening to silence while crying tears of joy and relief. Her parents thought she was having a nervous breakdown, but it was the opposite. She was finally free. She could sleep and live without voices in the background attacking her when she was vulnerable. She could finally let go and stop being in survival mode. From then on, she never spoke of the lake again, she never went back, and she did everything she could to stop thinking about it. Her parents were relieved to see her getting better, so they stopped mentioning the incident. She didn't try to understand why the ghosts had suddenly decided to leave her alone. She simply wanted to pick up her normal life where she'd left it before the cursed lake ruined everything. It wasn't until several weeks later that she understood why the voices weren't hunting her anymore. They had found a new victim. One morning, while she was eating breakfast and watching TV, all programs cut out to broadcast a missing person alert, a little boy who lived in the same town. She knew immediately, she could feel it, he had joined the spirits of the lake. Her suspicions were confirmed a few weeks later when they found the body in the depth of the lake. According to the news channel, he had managed to get in through the hole in the fence, the same ones Molly had used. Despite knowing how to swim, he had drowned inexplicably. It was as if he had remained trapped at the bottom of the lake without trying to resurface. The autopsy showed that he had simply breathed in the water that filled his lungs until he succumbed. They had shared the same experience, the only difference being that the younger had survived, but he hadn't. She never spoke of her experience with the lake again. She would have been considered crazy anyway, and her only goal was to forget it all. She only hoped that other children wouldn't fall victim to those cursed waters. So she was relieved when she learned that the city council had the area paved over to prevent further death. Although the lake had been a protected nature reserve, given the number of drownings the city had recorded, its destruction had been unanimously approved and no one had objected. Ironically, the site had been transformed into a children's playground on a concrete surface, beneath which surely lay the souls of all the children the water had claimed. Years passed, and the legend of the lake gradually faded from memory. Molly, for her part, resumed her life and locked all those memories away in a secluded corner of her mind. She reached her 15th birthday without anything strange happening again. However, what she had experienced as a child had left its mark. As she grew up, Molly became interested in the paranormal and the esoteric. She sought by all means to understand how to protect herself against malevolent spirits and any paranormal beings. Ancient rituals, discussions with indigenous descendants, it had become her passion. Molly's parents moved on quickly, too happy to have a normal life again. They saw that Molly was happy and at peace, and that was what mattered the most. The entire town did everything it could to forget and erase the tragedy of the past. The residents were all reassured by the town's decision, especially since no further incidents had occurred afterward. But this wasn't the end, quite the contrary. The city hadn't solved any problems, it had simply moved them elsewhere. To seal off the lake, they had had to drain it. They transferred the water to the sea near the neighboring town. The entities, however, were on with this water. By releasing them into the sea, the municipality had given them the largest playground they had ever had. Thus, drownings began to multiply in the nearby coastal town. Not just children anymore, but teenagers as well. The creator had escalated. It now prowled the beaches, gathering victims. Unfortunately, drownings were already frequent at the seaside, so the creature's attacks attracted no attention, allowing the entity to continue its relentless pursuit without being apprehended. For her part, Molly was convinced that the shadows had vanished forever. She thought she'd never have to face them again. She was wrong. One summer, her friends had invited her to a party on the beach in the next town. She'd immediately agreed and gone, feeling confident and relaxed. The party was in the middle of the night, so the group was alone on the beach around an impromptu campfire. The party was in full swing with music, dancing, laughter, and alcohol. But in the middle of it all, a murmur like a distant song reached Molly's ear. She froze, her heart pounding and her breath catching in her throat for a second. She recognized the voice. She'd heard it before. Her gaze slowly drifted toward the murky water, frozen in place. Her attention shifted completely from the party to the waves from which the song was rising, growing louder and louder. She wanted to move. She should have run away. But she remained paralyzed. Her breath came in ragged gasps as memories of her childhood flooded back. Memories she thought she'd never have to relive. Instinctively, her hand reached out to cover the tattoo she'd gotten without her parents' permission, as if to check it was still there. It was obviously not just a simple tattoo, it was a set of runes meant to protect her soul from evil spirits, and she wanted to believe it. At that precise moment, she prayed that these runes had real power. It was only when pairs of eyes appeared in the water that Molly felt her body regain its mobility. She took an automatic step back and turned to her companions, her hands trembling. "We should leave right now," she urged. One of her friends came and put her arm around her shoulders. "We just got there. Don't worry. If you're afraid of getting arrested for drinking alcohol while underage, there is no need to worry. There is no reason. We are alone here, and the police almost never come to inspect the beach. Relax, Molly, and have fun for once," she tried to reassure her. Molly's gaze drifted back to the waves, seeing more and more white eyes opening. The sight sent a shiver of terror through her. "No, you don't understand. We really have to leave quickly," she shouted before turning off the music to get the others' attention. Several insults were hurled, along with grunts and displeasure and questions. No one understood why Molly was suddenly acting so strangely. "We have to leave right now," she screamed in a panic. But her biggest mistake had been turning off the music, because now the creature's cries reached the entire group. Everyone turned their heads toward the waves, as if hypnotized. Molly then realized her mistake. She turned the music back on to drown out the entity's voices, but it was too late. Her friends were already walking toward the sea. She tried to stop them, to pull them away from the shadows, but it was no use. "Don't listen to them, don't listen to the chanting," she tried to shout to wake her friends, but it was no use. They were all heading straight to the trap, and there was nothing she could do. She couldn't help them all. In despair, Molly decided to save at least one person. "I'm sorry," she said to the others before rushing toward her best friend. She grabbed her by the waist just before her feet touched the water, pulling her as far away as possible. Her friend struggled to reach the entity, but Molly held firm. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see the other sinking into the dark waves and likely disappearing forever. Tears welling in her eyes and broken heart, Molly silently apologized again for not being able to save them. Taking advantage of this brief moment of inattention, her friend struck her in the stomach and broke free. Molly staggered back, gasping for air. By the time she could straighten up, her friend had already reached the water. The shadowy hands were drawing dangerously close to the hypnotized girl. Without thinking, Molly ran faster than ever. She grabbed her friend and threw her out of the water, watching her collapse onto the dry sand. The next second, hands wrapped around Molly's leg and violently pulled her into the water. A cry escaped her before she was submerged, the shadows dragging her even deeper. She struggled frantically, but the shadows were numerous, far more than when she was little. And all those hands held her firmly to the bottom, preventing her from making the slightest movement. The creators could sing as loudly as they wanted. They didn't seem to be able to penetrate Molly's mind. Molly continued to struggle furiously. Then one of the shadows detached itself from the dark mass, taking on a silhouette and standing above Molly, studying her with its white eyes. Molly stopped moving as the silhouette moved closer to her face. "We know you," the creator voice echoed. Molly's eyes widened in terror. It was the original shadow, the one that had lured her into the lake when she was a child. She was certain she could recognize it. "You escaped us, but today you will become one of us," the shadow crooned before placing a hand on the girl's chest. Its piercing white eyes locked into Molly's as the figure hand began to apply increasing pressure, forcing Molly to exhale and by extension to inhale reflexively afterward. This would allow the water to seep into Molly's lungs, and that would be the end. The girl's face contorted in pain as she fought against the shadow's pressure. Then, unable to bear it any longer, she let the air escape. Oxygen bubbles rose to the surface, much to Molly's dismay. Her survival instinct kicked in, forcing her to take a breath even though she was trapped underwater. A victorious smile spread across the creature's face as it moved closer, observing Molly's struggle. "Join us," it ordered. Despite fighting against her instinct, Molly couldn't resist inhaling, if only for a fraction of a second, just enough to let a trickle of water into her mouth. It was enough to let the creature in. The shadow kept its gaze fixed on Molly's face as she sensed something was wrong. Something that had diffused within her until it reached to the very core of her soul. However, the moment this thing touched the core, it was violently repelled. The shadow screamed and withdrew its hand from Molly's chest as if it had been burned. The hands that had been holding the girl vanished at the same time. Without hesitation, Molly mustered her strength and determination to swim to the surface as fast as she could. Once out of the water, she crawled, coughing up the liquid that had entered her lungs. She then collapsed onto the sand to catch her breath, surprised and relieved to be alive. Her gaze drifted to her tattoo. The runes had truly protected her. Then her eyes settled on the wave where the shadow she knew so well was standing. Their eyes locked for a long moment. Against all odds, the shadows made no further attempt against the girl. "Molly," a whisper rose on the wind before the creature vanished once more into the waves. With a weary, relieved sigh, Molly lay back down on the sand. She had survived not once but twice this entity. Then her memory of her friend floated back, and she scanned her surroundings. Her friend was sitting on the sand, staring blankly ahead, surely in shock. Molly approached the girl and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked. Her friend gave her a look that was both lost and terrified. "What on earth was that?" "Long story," Molly replied simply. "Our friends, are they gone forever?" Molly remained silent for a moment, the images of her friends being swept away by the waves flashing through her mind. "I'm sorry," she whispered, before taking her friend in a comforting embrace. They both sat on the sand for a long time before promising each other not to tell anyone. Who would believe them anyway? Then they went home. After that, their friendship only grew stronger, and Molly's obsession with paranormal only intensified. Perhaps one day she would have the knowledge to not only protect herself from entities but also prevent them from causing harm for good. And this is the end.